Welcome to the Optimalist podcast, where we examine just what it takes to ensure humans flourish in the age of AI. I'm Sarah, your host through this exploration of mindfulness, attention, focus, and motivation, all elements of human flourishing. So how do we cultivate them? Since 2009, TEDx speaker, author, and life strategies coach Ranbir Puar has been helping adults and children break free of their limiting beliefs by providing the tools to tap into their inner strength and silence their inner critics. And this week, she joined me on the podcast. She is the creator of the popular Today I Practice Life Strategies app, helping to enable individuals to break free and reach their full potential. Her work has garnered global recognition, and she's been prominently featured in numerous publications, including Forbes. Listen as Ranbir and I discuss personal excellence, mediocrity, tech dependency, and resilience. All this and more in today's conversation.
For me, metacognition is incredibly powerful because it, essentially refers to the ability to reflect on yourself, how you learn, how you process, how you feel in the body. So it brings together a space, it's almost like a neutral space where you can bring together your thinking, your feeling, and your big self, and it's creating awareness of your awareness. So it's really almost as if you're sort of, I try to get kids and parents, whatever, just to imagine closing their eyes and rising above the self as though they're in a viewing stand.
Oh, I love that.
So if they were viewing themselves. So it's different from my perspective. It's so powerful if you can learn to view yourself from a place of objectivity and neutrality. And when you can get to that neutral place, then there's so much power. I mean, the Buddhists call it the middle way. In India, we call it different things too, right? But it's that middle space of neutrality. And quite often people take so little time to look at themselves objectively.
Yeah. And what we think about also is how hard it is to, we often think about the stuff in the context of school and education and learning and reading and all of that kind of more formal stuff. But I do so much talking with adults about how they even move through something like having dinner with your family, getting together with friends, participating in your own hobbies. Like you call yourself a reader, but you can't sit down and you're not, that you're not reading the way you want to. And I'm not reading a book a month or 2 books a month like I used to, but where is my attention? And am I aware of, or am I just complaining that I'm not doing what I want? Or am I aware of why and how I can move forward living in the present? So there's so much that goes into this, all of these layers. And I'm excited to get into some of them with you and talk about I'm looking at these crossroads of how all of our work comes together. And I'm so excited to talk to you because you've been referred to me so many times by Tara. Now I'm getting excited.
I'm excited.
I'm glad that we were able to finally do this. And I know it was my fault for not connecting with you earlier, but now we're here. And so I kind of would like to dive first into a little bit about what kind of has influenced your path or your journey or the work that you now do. How did you find yourself in your present state?
Well, my story is a really bizarre and unique one. I didn't intend to do this. I didn't intend to do this work. I'm one of those people, if you say to me, it's almost somebody threw a challenge my way and said, you're making excuses. You have this skill and this ability and you're not using it. And I thought, I'll show you, so it started like that. And actually, interestingly enough, the person that happened to do that, I didn't know who he was. I didn't know the power of who he was at the time, happened to be Wayne Dyer. And he's famous in the self-help world, but I didn't really know who he was when I first met him. Anyway, so it just started off with this conversation with him. And he said this thing to me like, oh, you have this gift and ability and you should be working in this space. And I thought, challenge accepted. And so terrible. But I grew up with such a chip on my shoulders. And I grew up in an environment that was challenging it challenged me to my core. And it wasn't until, I guess, my first iteration began when I met my husband in 1996. And he was the first person that was bold enough to challenge me on my victim story.
Interesting.
He was bold enough to ask me how it served me. He was bold enough to push me into an area of massive discomfort. And it changed my whole life to let that go. It changed everything from my cells to my skin, probably to my spirit. And it allowed me to release something that I didn't want to hold anyway. It's almost as though him challenging me gave me permission to awaken my inner champion and let go of the inner critic. And when I'm talking to kids and I'm trying to describe what the inner critic is, I use this reference to a book a lot of them have read. It's called Don't Let the Pigeon Drive the Bus. And I don't know if you've read that
I know
book,
it, yeah.
But when my sons were little, we read the book.
Yep.
And the pigeon, his legs aren't long enough. And he just begs and begs and begs. So please, please, please let me drive the bus. And it's very much like our inner critic. Like, she's not equipped to drive this big, powerful being that is me. She's has the ability to do some of it, steer a little bit, but can't put the feet on the gas, can't brake, nothing. And so I try to look at my inner critic like that little pigeon, not capable to fully drive. So what can I do instead? How can I choose to let that inner champion wake up? It's hard to do the work to release the story. And it's hard to do the work to stay in the story.
I love that. And so do you often attribute, I guess, maybe we would call it a pivot in your journey to the encouragement and challenge that your husband provided you at that time?
1,000%. And I don't say this lightly, and I don't say this in any sort of, even, I'm not trying to romanticize this in any way. I'm going to give that disclaimer, but he saved my life.
Yeah.
By allowing me, I think I was going down a path of consistent dark thoughts and heaviness. And he allowed me to remember who the little girl was in there with the dreams and the vision, and let her come back to life. So it's pretty cool.
And so I'm thinking about the possible connection in the story you're just telling to your emphasis on this idea of personal excellence and dealing with mediocrity. And I think about that with teachers all the time too. And we try to address like what it means to, it's hard. It's a hard topic, like what it means to kind of push and encourage. And it's a part of awareness, right? Helping people, especially helping young people, realize their potential and to be aware of it on their own. It's part of that awareness, right? But not wanting to push too hard where it feels, like you're overdoing something. So I don't know, I'm interested in that, the personal excellence versus mediocrity, especially in a world that's remote first, where we can often feel, I work remotely and it can be easily done where I can just kind of go through my day. No one's looking at me. And I fear for a lot of us in these situations where we're not really in front of other humans a lot. So I know I'm saying a lot, but you can kind of take this however you want to, and I can add to it.
Oh yeah. I have a lot of different thoughts going through my head. I have a saying that I've had for a long time. I say, stop measuring yourself with sticks that belong to others, and get your own stick. And so getting your own stick is really actually figuring out who you are. And it comes back to that metacognition, awareness of your awareness. I wrote a post that is titled, "When I Realized I Was Ordinary, My Life Became Extraordinary." And in that recognition, because I was so busy chasing the gold stars, I was so busy chasing recognition and trying to be special that meant that then if I was special and I got the gold star, that means somebody else didn't. It was this, I wasn't chasing the gold star because my inner champion thought I deserved the gold star. I was trying to beat somebody. And so when I realized that I'm ordinary, and that's when I became extraordinary, or my life became extraordinary, is because I was able to feel secure in my abilities, my gifts, my potential, my challenges, secure enough that it didn't bother me what the next individual did or didn't do. It didn't shake me up on the inside. And I think when we can raise children to have that kind of inner resolve, that they're elastic. And I use the analogy of the trampoline. If you watch my TED Talk, I talk about the trampoline. We want our children and our adults to be like the trampoline. People are going to jump on you. Guaranteed. That's life. And if they didn't, you would never grow. So when they jump on you, the trampoline does dip. It has a dip. But it will bounce them back and come back to its natural state. But it's so complicated on the surface, but it's very simple when we go to use tools. I mean, they're ancient in my ancestral practices, but use the body. In the West, we're so much in our minds. And so teaching children how to anchor in their bodies and just doing simple exercises where they put their feet flat on the ground and feel the edges of their feet and just start to see, what does that feel like to be supported and by yourself?
Yes. I mean, so that is obviously what I keep bringing the conversation back to. Like, it's one thing where we learn this and know it and own it ourselves. And then we coach younger people and we teach them or we model it for them. But then how do we make sure that awareness, that level is there where they can do this on their own and they want to do it and they feel that? I think part of that is, and you're explaining it in some of your, the awakening part of your journey where the light bulb went off, like a million light bulbs seem to have gone off, but like that almost has to happen in a way where every individual, we're not just talking about students here, but everybody has to feel that brain body connection. Like, we can't just live in the body and you can't just live in the brain. You are not one or the other. Yeah. I was in a lecture the other day where it was about the mind and it was about mindfulness, but it was like kind of a basic training based on a book I had read a while ago, but there were over 280 people there. And it was a virtual thing. So there was a chat going on. And towards the end of it, the woman who was speaking said, she was giving an example of what you just mentioned about anchoring yourself, finding your feet on the ground, this groundingness. And she gave the classic example of the reason why we anchor ourselves to the breath, or we think about the breath, because it's something that you have with you all the time, is how she explained it. And someone said in the chat, can you please explain why we can't use something like our cell phone to anchor ourselves? Because that's also with me all the time. And it was the end. And I was like trying to help answer some of these questions because I felt like often, and you might feel the same, we're embedded in this kind of talk every day that when we are exposed to people that don't think about this stuff, it's shocking to me how much we need these conversations. Like, what's the difference between anchoring yourself to your breath and thinking about that, bringing you into the present moment, or your feet on the ground, or your hands on the desk in front of you? And what's the difference between that and like literally meditating on your phone? I mean, that's a shocking difference in balance to me that really I can't stop thinking about that from the other day, because it just really reinforced and reminded me of how different it is out there for people that are not thinking about this. And that's most people.
And how prevalent addiction is and how strong it is. That the cell phone has become an extension of the self.
Yes.
In their minds, the cell phone is an extension of them. That is their lifeline. And it's so challenging to allow to believe that people think like that. Of course, it's mind-boggling for us. I mean, I've been doing this work for over 14 years, so I feel like I've heard it all, and even for me, that's a first. I haven't heard somebody say.
That's why I keep bringing
cell phone.
You're like you're like the fourth person I've brought it up to in 2 days. I'm like, can you believe this?
But to me, that's I can't remember the exact way the phrase goes, but it's, and I think we're all little children walking around in adult bodies, and on many days we are. Some days we're fully adult, but I'm going to look up the phrase, but it's such a powerful one. I feel like it's important because I don't want to wreck it.
Totally.
The child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. The child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. And in many ways, it's a self-burning. When we're going to the cell phone and thinking that's an extension of the self, that is, you're burning yourself up inside. Because that's not authentic. That's not what your cells need. That's not what your nervous system needs. That's not what your spirit needs. That's not what your heart needs. It's so disconnected, and it is a burning of villages, and we need to come together in our space to bring options for those people that are realistic for them, that are accessible to them. Because we can't jump from a person thinking the cell phone's an extension of them to them meditating 20 minutes a day.
Right.
It's like an impossible extension.
Yeah. And this practice that they were explaining and just kind of trying to give people a little bit of a jump start into doing themselves was really, it was less of a full meditation, and it was a question about how to get yourself to practice focusing or practice your attention and bringing yourself back from distraction for like 5 minutes a day, that kind of a thing. And it lends itself to elements of meditation, of course, but the grounding yourself in something simple, in your breath or the environment around you or in front of you. I don't know. I would never jump to it being something like something that I'm holding. So
I just thought of a way that person could use it.
Yeah,
they could use their cell phone, find some maybe binaural beats or something. Get the right binaural beat. Set the timer on Spotify for 5 minutes, and they could put the phone next to them and close their eyes and just listen to the music with headphones.
And then they would have to just make sure that the idea was that you're only paying attention to one thing. And if you find yourself,
just to the music.
If you find yourself drifting, you have to become aware of that. And are you aware of it? Are you aware that your attention has gone elsewhere? And so now I'm realizing we could easily jump into my ideas about tech dependency that I wanted to talk about, but I wanted to just quickly make sure that we all understood the concept of mediocrity just before we move on. Like, are you measuring? I mean, I'm guessing I'm thinking about this mostly with students, but are you thinking of that in terms of mostly what you said before about, if someone is settling in their path or in their decisions or what they want for themselves, is it largely because they are measuring themselves next to others, or they're not thinking about what they're capable of yet? They haven't come to that full awareness, or if they're not really in themselves, they're thinking of anything but who they are really. Is that kind of how you're interpreting mediocrity?
Well, mediocrity is multi.
Yeah, I know.
Sometimes
that's what we're going to do, everybody. We're just defining it for you today.
Yeah, we're gonna give you three different options, three different buckets for mediocrity. Bucket number one, I think sometimes mediocrity is akin to apathy. And if you were to look at, something, for some people, it is akin to apathy. So they've given up on themselves. They don't have the internal roar to get out of apathy. So sometimes an apathy is far more challenging than to anger.
Yes.
It's got less of a juice, So when you're apathetic, you're just like, what's the point? I'm just going to get by.
And we're all so familiar with that these days, right? We think we really are. In different
bare
ways.
minimum. Just do the bare minimum.
Right.
Yeah. This is all they've asked of me. Bare minimum. And I think a lot of that is a challenge coming from the education system. And I love the teachers. And I think I'm talking more like curriculum, because I feel like their children know how to give you what you're asking for, but nothing extra. And so there's almost like they're being trained like robotically. do the bare minimum, and that's all you need. And there's this sort of messaging that I hear in the kids that I work with. Oh, no. The teacher said, if I do, I just this. And then the other messaging they hear is stories of the progress. So the other mediocrity comes from their parents' story.
Right.
So there's a apathy, and then the other mediocrity is there. The parent either believes the child's not good at math or whatever. So the child then adopts this concept, an identity of mediocrity, because maybe they're not as smart as their older brother or their older sister or their younger brother, it's how do they rank? So sometimes mediocrity is a ranking system that they get at home and then they bring to school.
Yeah, I can see that definitely.
Because they've been ranked that way at home.
Right.
And then other times mediocrity is boredom. That is, they're doing the mediocre thing because they really don't want to do it.
Right.
And so, not boredom, protest, actually. Protest would be the better word. So they're mediocre in order to almost have a voice.
Yes, I've seen that play out. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And now I am thinking about the tech part of this. This kind of all really does connect together, because especially since you said you've been doing this for about 14 years. And so, and I was teaching for about 14 years. And in the time that I've been out of the classroom for a few years now, but in that specific time frame just happened to be almost the exact trajectory of the cell phone being at its infancy. Like when I started teaching, I saw kids coming in with the first flip phones, where maybe 5 kids had it in my entire high school roster. And then when I left, it was like, kids trying to create Snapchat accounts for me. Like I saw like the whole trajectory had happened in that time during that exact years that I was teaching. But so I'm thinking about your time doing this work and everything you're talking about and bringing up so far. But is there an effect on how you see people's ability to be resilient because of their dependency or the availability of technology now? Is it affecting the way people are able to bounce back or take on challenges or see that they have more, like, kind of go against that grain of mediocrity? Like all of that, I think, is related to resilience in some way. And do you see technology having an effect on that?
Technology is so much a part of everything we're doing and our kids are doing. Mm-hmm. And it is a double-edged sword. It wields so much power for growth and opportunity and learning. There are so many ways to learn through tech. And so I would say if your home is grounded and your communication at home is grounded, then the technology doesn't impact your children as much, because they realize the reality versus I call it the highlights reel, REEL, versus the highlights reel, REAL.
Oh,
so
nice.
They're gonna live in the REAL because they have an understanding based on the adults that are role modeling.
Mm-hmm.
So there are going to be moms and dads and parents and grandparents that are going to be showing every bit of their lives on their Instagram stories, or every vacation, every bikini photo, every whatever, like every trophy the kid wins, and the parent externalizes it. And that is the program in that household. So then there could be other parents that say social media is for these things. I usually write a lot. I've taken much of the year off from posting and writing because it was very, very heavy load. And I just felt like I needed a break. But my kids have grown up. I used to do this thing on Fridays called Freedom Friday. And all the little kids that they went to school with knew that on Fridays, their mom's going to post this Freedom Friday. It was something inspirational to think about or talk about. Mm-hmm. And so my kids, for an example, have grown up seeing us using technology for work, for learning. So we've found cool games, math games, chess games, but mostly they use it to access their sports stats. So, how does their dad use their technology? He uses it to laugh, to watch movies, to be inspired, or sports stats.
Right.
So as corny or as trite as it sounds, the reality is a responsibility for that program starts at home. And I feel there's an age where the girls are impacted much, much more than boys on the social media and the tech. But for the boys, the technology has allowed them to connect during COVID, for example, lockdowns. Their social connections were allowed to still flourish because they could connect and play online. And I know one of my sons during the initial lockdowns, he started producing music. So technology is this double-edged sword, and it has to come. You have to be adult about it. And I think that could be where things go a little south, is that adults, they go on their phones so much, and then the children role model it and end up doing what the parents are doing. But then they lose their minds and get really angry so quickly because, the child's on the phone. But then the child can't say, but I learned that from you, so it's a really complex and very individual sort of conversation that has to happen around tech. Is very much like nourishment, right? We know what you eat is going to vary from house to house. And so how we nourish ourselves through tech or don't nourish ourselves through tech is very much like how we do or don't with food. I
just started reading this book kind of casually with a group of teachers. I don't know if you know this book. We just started it, and it's called, Attention Hijacked, Using Mindfulness to Reclaim Your Brain from Tech. But it was someone I interviewed on the podcast a few weeks ago. She hadn't read it, but she had heard that this author had this book, and we didn't know until we both picked it up and started looking at it this week that it's actually written for kids. It's not for you.
Oh, cool.
And then within it, because I was going through it and I'm like, this is kind of laid out in a way that doesn't look like it's for adults. And then I started reading it, and there's sections, I'm bringing this up because there's sections about tips for you as a kid or as a teenager to talk to your parents. There's whole pages that are like a workbook of how to talk to the adults in your life about their tech consumption. And so this is just like huge. The latest, obviously like big professional published piece of evidence, like in a long line of things that we're now hearing of teenagers stepping forward and being like, someone take this away from me, because in my house, like everybody's in their own little tech bubble, but I know that it's bad for me and I don't know what to do about it. Like, somebody help me. We talk about how it takes a little bit, only a tiny bit of time away for you to feel the difference in your body. But what happens when you keep doing that, and like we say, that the practice every day, like you become, all of the other things start to fall into place, right? Your ability to take on hard things, your ability to, which is related to being resilient, your ability to communicate in person with people, to pay attention to conversation. All of these things start to get a little bit better when you start to pay attention to what has your attention. And it's just such a huge conversation.
Definitely. It is a huge conversation. And often children are the scapegoats or the punching bags for this tech addiction, which started with the adults, because they're like, the kid's not, a 7-year-old's not going to be, who hasn't been exposed to somebody on their phone all the time, think that that's what I should be doing too.
Right.
If you were to ask, even, my eldest is almost 19. If I was to ask him, here's 2 choices. Envelope 1 is we're going to be outside and we're going to play soccer or go paddleboarding or do something outside, and option, for 3 hours. And option 2 is you can sit on your phone and play games for 3 hours. The kids want to be outside. The kids want to be active. They want their, to be firing and wiring with you. Mm-hmm. They don't want to be isolated from you. They want to be with you.
Right.
Because you are the sun and the moon and the stars for them. And there's that disconnect in the family unit that, it's nothing to do with the parents. It has so much to do with them. And also coming back to the concept, I posted this in my stories from Dr. Kathy Yeo, Y-E-O. And she wrote, how disconnected have we become that we need clinical studies to prove that nature is good for us?
I know. I know. There's a lot of stuff related to that pops up sometimes, like in Psychology Today. And I'm like, well, I don't know that we needed to...
Let's go back to basics.
So I also did just want to, before, because believe it or not, we've been talking for almost 40 minutes already. And
can I add one thing to the tech thing?
Recorded minutes. Oh yeah, go ahead. Sure.
Well, I'd like to be sure that when I say the parents are responsible, I'm not trying to shift guilt. Like that's not meant to be a thing of guilt. That's not meant to be a victim inducing conversation. It's meant to be an empowering one. Because when you know that you're a role model and when you know your actions have a reaction, that gives you power. And so you have the power to change and create change. It doesn't need to be a victim story. It can be a strong story to say, I can change this. I have capacity and capability to do that.
Yes. And that's something that we try to emphasize a lot here in our community. And when we're talking to people about how to try to use our Engageable software, our app, it's like, the idea is that you are able to engage with the world in front of you. You can engage with the life that's real life and in the present moment, but you don't feel like you have that ability. Like we can manage ourselves a little better. We don't have to be amazing at it. We don't have to have the best attention of anybody in the room or, know how to meditate better than anybody in our family or in our house. But it's about that little bit, like as you build that little bit each day, like, can you get to the point where can you sit for 10 minutes and think about one thing or read for 10 minutes and not be pulled into Instagram? All of these things are just so related. Like I just, I don't know. I get really passionate when I talk about that. Like, it's just, you have the ability to do it.
And usually the best place to start is, rather than trying to create a new habit, is add it to something you already do, and if you look at something like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, of course, you're not going to be able to focus on it while you're sleeping. So that, sleep's kind of out of it, but add it to a physiological need like eating. So if you want to build a practice of mindfulness in your family, don't allow any technology during mealtime, whether the child is eating alone or whether the child is eating with you and your family. Ask them to pay attention to how the food feels inside their bodies, and they can become so intuitive and instinctual that way. And then you can build from there. But if we start with some of the physiological needs and adding a tech detox to that, it's a lot easier to build from that, because it's a primal need and a primal sort of foundation that it allows us to have some solid ground to build on. It's very difficult to ask them to change their tech habits when it comes to reading or things like that.
Yeah. And it's like, you just reminded me of, another term, like we love talking in education about building capacity and elsewhere, but like we usually talk about it in the case of learning. But one thing in the last couple of weeks, I've been talking to a couple of principals and librarians and other school leaders about this idea of, what if we approach the next school year with the capacity for attention and mindfulness first and academic second? Like, what if your teachers, as they came back to school, instead of whatever assembly or meeting that they're going to be called into normally, it's all about like, where is your attention? What is your capacity to change the way you interact with each moment? Like, where is that capacity, rather than jumping to your capacity for all of the other stuff that goes into teaching and learning and the official work of being in school, and put that aside and think about your individual capacity. And it's so powerful when I talk to wellness coordinators and SEL coordinators who are doing this stuff, and they see the change in adults, like when they start to see like, oh my gosh, like I'm literally able to start my work day, my school day, and not feel like I'm rushing from one class period to the next, because I am actually enjoying each one of these moments as they are arriving. And I'm not thinking about what I didn't do last period and mad at myself and judging yourself. And I'm not thinking about the 400 photocopies I have to make fifth period and like, I don't know what I'm going to do, what I'm going to eat. Like all of those things that I know everybody in the world deals with, but teachers have this hurried rush through the day that they, I think, sometimes feel like it's just part of what their job is because the bell rings and you must go. And we've talked about this a lot on the show about how do we take back our ability and capacity to just organize ourselves as a human. We're a human person. And I think that's what kids watch. And we all know that that our students are so susceptible to the way we act and feel and react to them as the day goes on. And how does it change if we approach the new school year thinking about our capacity for attention and mindfulness and resilience before we think about the academic part of our lives? And how does that change us?
Well, it increases capacity for learning because the concept of neuroception, my nervous system reads your nervous system. So if you're the teacher and your nervous system is off and it's in fight or flight, then so mine will attune to yours because you're the leader of the group. You're the, the person guiding me. You're my coach in that moment. So when we can teach teachers to attune to that self-regulation and understand that when they self-regulate, then they can co-regulate with the kids and having that, real connection with them. And it comes back to asking them, why are they there in that job? And sometimes having a quick reminder. I get clients to use tech, put it in their phone and have it pop up, sometimes when they're learning. A question that I get them to ask, and it'll pop up 3-4 times in the day, is why is my life so great? And it's better than a gratitude journal because you're not forced to write it. You have to, your brain will start looking for ways to answer the question rather than forcing yourself to write what's so good. And so you could ask, why did I choose to do this job as a teacher?
Right.
Ground in that, that the bigness of why you picked to be a teacher, genuinely wanting to support and help and grow children. And when you go from that place, it's easier to bring up that good feeling in the body, and there's so much science on the capacity of the heart, to help regulate you. And, there's an old saying that says the longest distance in the world is from the head to the heart. And when we can teach our teachers to go from the head to the heart and breathe from that heart center, like Heart Math does a lot of that work, heart coherence and getting them regulated there, it's powerful.
It feels powerful to me. Even just hearing you talk about it, I can feel it. Yeah.
You can legitimately feel the difference. And it's like I said, getting into that heart center. And it's old stuff. It's simple stuff, but they say simple is not easy.
No, I know. And then when we talk about it here, I'm sure you're experiencing the same. So much of it feels contagious. Like you want to give that gift of what you're speaking of what we're speaking of to as many people as possible. And it feels simple to us. Like, well, just all you have to do is what we're saying because we've experienced the difference in the way your body feels and it changes the wiring of your brain. And you don't approach 100%. Other experiences every day in the same way that you did before. And so it can become where we feel like, well, just do this. It's going to feel great. But until people do really understand that they need it and what it feels like and what we've been doing to ourselves, that's kind of the opposite of healthy. It's hard to really talk about it. And so that's one of the purposes of this podcast and the community that we've built around all this work, which is the Optimalist community and our newsletter and all of that, is really to bring as many educators and parents into this conversation as possible and expose everybody to conversations with people like yourself from a wide range of fields who are using this language and working directly with families or with schools. I think it's just so important for us to hear as many voices as possible And I'm just really grateful for...
Thank you for the work you're doing.
I'm grateful for the work you're doing and for Tara's beautiful connection of us over the months. But the way there was a couple of steps of how we end every episode of this podcast. And one of them is fun. And one of them is just kind of ending on a 1-sentence summary about mindfulness or attention. But so I'm wondering, and you can answer any of these or none of these, all of these, whatever part you want, but is there anything that you are listening to or reading or even watching that maybe is inspiring to you or that would give people a fuller picture of what it is that you consume that is a full part of who you are?
Well, I mean, attention is the most basic form of love. Mm-hmm. And when I start to think about it from that perspective and I pay attention to what I'm doing in the moment, it makes me feel like I like and care about myself. Right now, what I'm reading is preparing. I turned 50 this year, so I'm created a book study club.
Nice.
And so I'm reading the book that I'm planning to share in September, which is Eastern Body, Western Mind.
Cool.
And that is what I'm consuming at the moment.
Good. It sounds like a good thing to be consuming.
Yeah, it's not necessarily aligned in this space in particular, but it is very good in anchoring the old with the new. Because even a lot of Einstein's, findings were rooted in old Eastern philosophy. So there's ways to bring old and new together and to coexist. And I think there's beauty in that.
Yeah.
That's why I picked that book.
I love that. Yeah. And
bridge building.
It doesn't have to always be, we have people talk about all sorts of things on here that they're consuming, not always at all aligned with their work. We've talked about reality TV, like comedies, podcasts, music, anything that you would say like, hey, watch this or listen to this. It's kind of cool.
Oh, okay. Well, I would really like, I have on Spotify, I have some binaural beats lists, which I consume every day. There are some that are great for focus, some that are great for just relaxing and clearing and healing your mind. I don't watch a whole lot of TV. I have 2 teenage sons. And if I usually watch sports or some kind of action film where I close my eyes. I try to hang in there. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But, I think I'm a meditator and I like being outside. I like being with my family and my dog and my friends. So I think when I realized that simplicity allows me to have magic in my life, it changed everything.
Wow, that's like a perfect ending line. But we do have one more question. The question that to end all questions here is just if you could, do you have a method of attention or working on attention or practicing attention that you feel totally works for you or that you've seen work for others that you would recommend?
Sure. What I use to help my clients and myself get in attention quickly, believe it or not, is jumping jacks. And so they can help you when you feel anxious. The great thing about jumping jacks is they make you so big, your physiology changes and your brain gets signals that you're big and you're confident and you're capable. So that allows you to bring attention to the present moment. The other thing it does is jumping jacks make you almost out of breath. No matter how fit you are, at one point you're going to lose your breath. And they help you focus on breathing without focusing on your breathing. You have to think about breathing in order to get through them. They also do a great lymphatic drainage because you're up and the bouncing, your feet hitting the ground allow you to really anchor somatically because it's getting the lymphatic system going, but it's letting you realize that every time you jump, the ground is going to catch you. And it builds a sense of security in that. And at the end of it, almost everybody will be smiling. So they bring joy. So it's a really great, quick, easy practice. I've got clients that have their RX prescription is to, as soon as they wake up, they do jumping jacks now because it changes the flow of their morning routine. Right. Rather than, grabbing the phone or do quick jumping jacks, gets the blood flowing. Makes you feel alive, So that's my attention. Quickest way to get attention.
It's also a childlike connection as well, right? It's something jumping jacks.
Because you're a star.
Yeah. It's an exercise that you associate with like gym class. Not often something you think about that you're doing as an adult. And I think it has that playfulness to it. I have a yoga teacher that inserts them into, not all the time, but sometimes inserts them into certain transitions in between different parts of a flow of a practice. And if you don't know that they're going to come up, and I'm always like annoyed at first and like, oh, come on, this is ruining the flow. And then you're right. Afterwards, it's just like, oh, that kind of just changed the mood for a second. And then you go back to being like serious and focusing on your breath. And it just takes you out of that space. And the idea is to always stay in beginner's mind, right? You leave your comfort zone and shake it up and be playful and weird and get your heart pumping differently. And then you come back to the breath and in your regulated way. And then you're more willing to focus on the things that you know you have to do, I think, with less resistance, I think.
And they don't seem as heavy because you just lifted yourself.
Yes, exactly.
Like the problem doesn't seem as heavy because you literally lifted yourself.
Right.
Everything seems much more manageable after a few minutes of jumping jacks.
Totally agree. I'm so glad you brought that up. So where can people find you if they want to connect with you more either on social media, it could be on LinkedIn or website where they can find or connect to your work. And we'll link to everything you've talked about in our show notes today as well.
Sure. Yeah. I've had a site for a really long time and I've got to update it, but it's pureatma.com. And I'm on all the social medias. So,
all of them.
Wherever all of them, but most of them I'm under my name, Ranbir Puar, which you could have to look up in the links, how to spell it. And normally I'm quite active on social media. I just have taken a little break, but I'm getting back to it. I have a podcast if you want to go back and listen to my work, I haven't done a podcast in a little while, but there are a lot of good articles and podcasts in there, everything about how to redefine anxiety and use it as an energy management system rather than labeling as anxiety. So I've got a lot of resources that are free because my mission is to try to reduce the barrier to access to this kind of information. So I try to pour my whole heart and soul into it. So people that want to get this help and support that they need, that they can get it.
Cool.
Oh, and I also have a free class, which I'll link to, that I've put in the link for you, which is 10 techniques to awaken your inner champion.
Awesome.
So it's a 10-day, every day you learn a new technique for 10 days.
Is that geared towards anybody or is it for adults or anyone that wants to pick it up?
Anyone could do it.
Okay, great.
Anyone could pick it up. And I tried to make it as if you were paying for it, but you're getting it at no cost. So,
okay, cool. So comprehensive.
So you get 10 different days. Yes, that's nice. Not overwhelming, but enough for you to get your teeth into it.
Awesome. Well, is there anything else you want to leave us with? Otherwise, I think we're good.
It was great to meet you, and Tara was right. I think we're kindred spirits, and I'm glad that we've connected, and I'll look forward to getting to know you more.
I hope you're leaving this conversation feeling a bit refreshed by the way Ranbir talks about her epiphany in adulthood and her experience working with people from all walks of life to reach their full potential. That mentality is so aligned with the way we work at The Optimalist and, of course, to build Engageable. But I'm eager to know what you're thinking yourself. You can let us know by leaving a comment on Substack, a review in Apple Podcasts, and you can reach me on Twitter at scandela9. You can listen and subscribe to The Optimalist podcast wherever you love listening to great podcasts. New episodes are released every Wednesday, and links to all of these resources are available in the show notes. The Optimalist podcast is brought to you by Engageable, the only app that gives you the mindful pulse you need for better attention. And it's free. Create an account today at getengageable.com or by downloading Engageable on any iOS or Android device. You can also follow us at Get Engageable on Twitter and Instagram. Thanks for listening to The Optimalist. I'll be back next week with a new conversation. Stay engaged.